flexible thinkers. You submit a talk 6 months ago, or however long it was, and then you change how you think. So I've changed the title from Beyond the Misconception of Socialism as a Planned Economy to Beyond the Misconception of Socialism as a Planned Economy. But what I want to do is, I suppose, then play devil's advocate, I suppose. Start with the thesis that socialism is not fundamentally a planned economy. And a lot of what I'll be saying is very aligned with Tom's talk. And the reason for the question mark is because since then I've walked myself back somewhat from this, but largely it's Alejandro's fault for ruining this talk. But I think it is very useful though for us to contend with this sentence, this idea that socialism is not a planned economy, because the main point of this talk is that I think that there's a real lack of clarity around the concept of planning and associated ideas, and that it's only truly in wrestling with this very strong form of the argument that socialism is not a planned economy, very much aligned with things that Tom was saying, that we can actually clarify what planning is and where it slots into our thinking. So why does this matter? So it's not just defining words for the sake of it. Obviously how we think about the problems we're trying to solve, and also how we think about designing solutions, is going to shape the solutions we propose. And the solutions we propose are designing the entire society. So what I would say is that planning is a central category for our field. We're here with INDEP, so International Network for Democratic Economic Planning. We define our space of post-capitalist political economy in distinction to other spaces within that as democratic economic planning. But I would say that this idea of democratic economic planning is very underspecified. I would say probably deliberately underspecified to an extent to avoid conflict, because we've been a very small space within a larger left. Even thinking about alternatives to capitalism, I think there has been convenience in putting ourselves under this larger umbrella. But I would say at this point it is important for us to specify. So the problem is that it hides conceptual confusions and important disagreements that lead to important practical differences in designing socialism. So we have this common framing that socialism is a planned economy and capitalism is a market economy. Obviously there's more to it than that. So let's talk about planning. So what do we actually mean by planning? As I see it, there is no consistent definition. Everybody in this room has their own idea of what planning is. They come from very different frameworks. We use the term very loosely. For example, often it is treated as an equivalent to coordination itself, as if all coordination is planning, which can be a very confusing idea, because I would say that it's stretching the notion of what planning is to a level of generality where it's hard to say that it's meaningful if everything is planning. Often it's contrasted with market. That's a very classical definition of planning. Planning is that thing which is not market, and I'll talk about market in a minute. And sometimes it is used as just a euphemism for socialism itself. So the entire whole of socialism and everything that goes within that in terms of cooperative labour, social ownership, income equality and so forth comes under planning as a big heading. But arguably planning is something that is much more specific, and it has a niche within socialism. So is socialism a planned economy? As we know, obviously planning is endemic to capitalism, yet we don't describe capitalism as a planned economy. And so what do we actually mean by a planned economy? What does it mean to say that an economy itself is planned rather than planning merely occurs within it? Let's take something here from discussions with Donald, some of you know Donald Cushel, we're talking about this, and he said, both socialism and capitalism use accounting, yet we don't describe, say, socialism as an accounted economy. Accounting is a technical process which exists in both. planning, you could say, is a technique or a technical process. Why is it appropriate to describe socialism as a planned economy? So what exactly is planned, right? So there are very different notions of planning. So for example, those of us who advocate for comprehensive planning have a very particular view, which is that the entire assortment of goods and services within the economy need to be planned in a very rigorous and methodical way. This contrasts very strongly with, for example, a notion of planning which focuses on the determination of broad strategic priorities, determining ecological constraints at the system boundary, or social vision for the next 50 years, these kind of things. So we might argue that a planned economy is one where planning is dominant. Again, I just would query what do we mean by that dominant, in what way? Does it mean that we're planning everything within an inch of its life through a central solver or so forth, or does it just mean that broad priorities are determined and other ideas? These are all very different notions. Does it mean that planning is somehow is occurring at the economy level in a way that we would not say for capitalism, that we can think of socialism as a society which at its global system level steers itself, so that let's say it's not the amount of planning which occurs, because planning goes on all the time in capitalism, but it's the integration of planning. So we could think about global society as one single unit planning itself into the future to navigate ecological conditions. Then democratic planning, okay, so this is one distinction. We might say that the difference between capitalism and socialism is while planning occurs in capitalism, in socialism planning is democratic. So we talk about democratic economic planning. This is one answer. Okay, there's definitely some merit to this, but then we could also say, what's the difference between this and saying that it's a democratic economy? Saying that socialism is democratic. Do we need to talk about planning? Arguably we do. So, yes, so we need to wrestle with this contention that socialism is not a planned economy in order to clarify these issues, which are very important, they're very fundamental. And I'm going to talk about why, in a little bit actually, why this matters practically. So talking about a market. Market and plan for us classically go together. There's this duality between plan and market. But what do we mean by market? Okay, again, there's no consistent definition. There definitely are definitions, but they vary very widely. So if we, just to begin with before looking at different meanings of market, if we start from the position that we reject the market and that the systems of types of socialism we advocate are non-market, then obviously we need to have a very clear understanding of what the market or what markets are and what their problems are. What we find is that everybody has a different notion of what the market is, and because of that, in rejecting that, we lead to proposing a different system. And I guess as a field, we are not, there's a lack of coherence. It's hard to actually talk to each other, and a lot of this is often not made explicit. We use these categories as if we have a shared notion of what a market is, but actually they disagree fundamentally. So what is a market? I'm just going to throw in some ideas which occur in use. Is it decentralized coordination? Is it mere trade and exchange? Many of us would argue that this alone is enough to constitute a market. Is it capital accumulation? Okay, this is something that everybody would agree is a problem. Is it economic competition? Is that what constitutes a market? How about prices? Or is the mere use of prices constituting a market? Again, many of us here would believe so. How about prices which incorporate supply and demand? Is that a market? if that is a market, is it a problem? You know, I mean, I very firmly believe that if you use prices, there has to be some opportunity for them to respond to supply and demand, otherwise they're not going to have a functioning system. So if that is market type behavior, whatever way you do it, does that mean that it's not planning and that it's capitalism and it's a problem? So, yeah, I'm not going to present a definitive notion of what planning is and what the market is, and largely my purpose here is to try to stimulate thought and encourage us to confront these questions and maybe go off for ourselves and clarify them and come back later. Right, so Tom covered this already. A lot of the way that we think about planning is centered on this notion of ex-ante coordination. And ex-ante, just in case anybody doesn't know, refers to the commitment of resources in advance of their use for thinking about production. And ex post is referred as the opposite. It is the changing of plans or changing of behavior in response to actual events. There's a really good paper on this by Nick Rogers, all about this topic, deconstructing this idea that this is a defining distinction between capitalism and socialism, arguing that both ex-ante and ex-post coordination occur in capitalism and in socialism. You know, ex-ante coordination is very common in capitalism, and equally ex-post adjustments are crucial in socialism. A system cannot function without it. And I think that there have been a lot of mistakes that have been made in being too critical of ex-post coordination and putting too much of a burden on ex-ante, leading to problems around information and uncertainty. We'll deal with that now. Okay, so why does this matter? This is a snapshot of democratic economic planning. From my point of view, it's tricky because it's dealing with a lot of different things at the same time. Okay, so this doesn't apply to everything, but here are some of the problems with this framing of socialism as planning, democratic economic planning. So first is the rehabilitation of statist regimes as fellow planned economies. And Tom, you talked on this. And these are systems which, from one point of view, share very little with socialism and are basically orthogonal to socialism. Yet, functionally, they're brought into our discourse in a quite sympathetic way sometimes, because they were interested in planning and using planning techniques, even though the actual political economy, the social relations of these societies were antithetical to socialism in many ways. Equally, inheriting terms of debate from these societies. A lot of the way that we think about coordination, socialism, the problems to solve, and the ways to approach them are inherited from places like the USSR, because we see ourselves as continuous with this tradition of planning, and in ways that set us up, I think, to answer the wrong questions and make the wrong assumptions. This is a huge one, neglective adaptation, right? So there's a widespread marginalization of adaptation, fear of flexibility, and initiative as the seeds of capitalism. So I think that one phrase we will never utter is democratic economic adaptation. We concede this ground, not entirely, but almost entirely, to the marketists, to the Austrians, to the capitalists, as if we do planning, they do adaptation. You know, we do global optimization, they do local discretion, local knowledge, flexibility. And this leads to, so for example, I don't think it's a coincidence that the issue of entrepreneurship and innovation has been so neglected within a post-capitalist political economy. I think that is significantly due to this planning and ex-ante idea, because it just does not fit into this idea of planning things in advance that it's to do with initiative, local peer-to-peer relations, and so forth. Okay, planometrics. So Tom talked about cybernetics. I think cybernetics also is very important. It's fundamental. But there's another tradition which comes out of the Soviet Union called planometrics, which sometimes is called cybernetics confusingly. And so this is this preoccupation with using computer power, mathematical optimization techniques, and a focus on, I would say, imposing this way of thinking onto society in a way which doesn't really take account of the nature of complex systems and also social relations. The neglect of advanced production forms, so neglect of epochal advancements in organizations within capitalism is very important to engage with. So they're talking about total production system, and then Vanguard, which is basically being applied to services. This upends a lot of our assumptions about the nature of efficiency organizing systems. I might, will I talk about this now? Yeah, okay, talk about this now. So, for example, just to, my main point here is it's very important to look into the toilet production system, for example. And this is something we should all be dealing with. I think we implicitly approach production from the point of view of Fordism, which within capitalism is now obsolete for decades. And the way that we think about efficiency, for example, is often very forecast heavy and push. Thank you. Yeah, forecast heavy and push production. You know, you decide everything in advance, you create these large batches, and that's what's efficient, rather than the toilet production system, which shows that actually there's a very different way that you can achieve efficiency and optimization, which is you try to cut out as much waste within the system and have every link in the chain seamlessly connected to the next, so that I can adapt as quickly as possible. So it's like efficiency as adaptation rather than efficiency as this global optimization procedure. And it's a very different way of thinking about things. It's very stimulating in thinking about how we can achieve coordination, and it changes our intuition. Okay, hurry up a bit. Narrow focus. So I think planning focus, we can neglect political economic issues which escape characterization as planning. So Dominique, if he's here, anyway, talked about the solidarity economy when we were in the networking session, and how it would be great for INDEP to make links with that. And I've also thought this, and there's one of the reasons I think that we haven't done that, or we don't do that, is we have this notion that we are the democratic economic planners, and we have a notion of what that is, and solidarity economy, for example, doesn't fit within that. Yet from the political economic perspective, we might say that it is very German. Okay, and then the last one, quickly, solutions looking for problems. So detachment of proposed solution from real problems. We can become absorbed so much into this planning mentality and talking about optimal planning techniques that we can end up in the far reaches of outer space, coming up with very, very interesting ideas, okay, but they're not grounded in the routines and the problems of real organizations. So, socialism as a autonomous corporation. This is basically the same point that Tom was making, except in a different way. That fundamentally, it's the social relations which are crucial in socialism. Things like egalitarian division of labour, true democratic polity, income equality, and so forth. And that this is what defines socialism, and this is what should define our orientation fundamentally. It's not planning itself. We might think about how planning becomes an expression of this somehow, but I think we need to find a way to distinguish ourselves from the ways of thinking we don't like, such as market socialism, which doesn't rely so much on planning and is more is articulated this way through social relations. Yeah, I wanted to talk about command and control, John said, but I don't think I have enough time to talk about any of this stuff, actually.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
That's not true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this
panel goes until 10, we're at 9:25.
I have minus.
Others were shorter.
No, I have minus 15 seconds.
I think I was early, so I think if you want to take it.
Okay, I'll say a little bit just as a.
Yeah, adaptation. I said adaptation.
Oh, adaptation. Yeah, good. Exactly. Beautiful. Okay, so I'm not going to say much on these. I'll just say a little point maybe on each slide. And similarly to my last talk about SDT, the main point will not be make the conclusive arguments, but to mention something that I think is very interesting and that can inform our thinking and maybe spark some curiosity about exploring that. So one thing is this management consultants. So a lot of the ideas that inform this talk come from management rather than from economics. There's this brilliant management consultant called John Seddon from Vanguard Consulting, and he's written several books about the idea of command and control. And I think it is really interesting for us in particular to engage with this material because okay, let's say the command part, treating people in an alienated fashion is not so applicable. You know, we believe in participation, we believe in autonomous motivation. But other things, the control aspect, actually can occur in the way that we think about coordination, what we need. So the idea of, there's a very sophisticated critique of the use of targets and how we can think that we implement targets and we can use this in order to plan something and achieve it in advance, but actually this can destabilize the system for various reasons. I'm just going to, like I said, I'm just going to mention this because I don't want to dwell on too much. Another thing is cybernetics. Okay, so the problem with cybernetics is that it's something which is actually genuinely difficult to understand. I suppose that's one of the reasons it's so valuable. But yeah, the viable system model of Stafford Beer. So this has become very trendy now. Oh, we all have cybernetics, Stafford Beer, and but it is actually really useful. And I think that this can inform our notion of coordination in a really rich way, which can help us to understand where planning fits into that. I'll just say a little thing about this in the picture. Understanding how real organizations work. So this sounds so stupidly obvious, right? But there's a reason that I'm saying it, which is it can be really good to remind ourselves to. So we deal in a very macro level. Post-capitalist political economy it's fascinating because we deal with on all scales, micro, macro, and you have to understand everything, and it's difficult to go into depth into every little aspect. But there's a lot of value in looking in detail at how real organizations work today, which can change the way that we think about the problems that we're trying to solve. So for example, like I said about the toilet production system, like looking at how does production actually occur today and asking ourselves, and also in a more general sense, we can come up with these planning schemes for how to coordinate the whole economy, but sometimes we can do this without we start basically from a top-down perspective of, okay, we're going to plan the economy. Here's the scheme for how to do it. We don't start from the perspective of, here are real organizations, social organisms which exist, they have their own routines, they have their own problems, their own needs, and how do we start from how they actually do things, and then ask, how can we design institutions and processes that actually help them to solve their problems in a way which is realistic. So I'm going to end with this by saying, looking at this core claim again, so socialism is not fundamentally a planned economy, it is a society of autonomous cooperation where planning is one tool. I don't necessarily actually believe that. But I think that there's a very good argument for it, and I think that in trying to refute that we can learn a lot. Okay, so thank you.